The focus is on charting the course from poverty to prosperity for the majority. Absolute poverty is defined as the number of those who cannot afford the bare essentials: food, shelter, clothing. Sometimes the World Bank says those who live under $1.90. But this has become, by and large, especially over the past 3 decades, perhaps the biggest economic challenge for Nigeria. What is astonishing about the poverty situation is that it has persisted even when the nation earned its highest revenues. The NBS figures published of its household poverty surveys in 2012, which was the last survey done, showing that despite rising oil prices and growth figures, poverty increased in every study cycle. I'll just share some of the figures with you very quickly. In 1980, absolute poverty figures, that's the absolute numbers, was 17.1 million Nigerians. In 1985, 34.7 million Nigerians. In 1992, 39.2 million. 1996, 67.1 million. 2004, 66.7 million. 2010, which is the last household survey of poverty done, 112.47 million. The figures for the next cycle are currently being compiled by the NBS. But the truth is that despite what would appear to be rising revenues, especially oil revenues, poverty has remained more or less stagnant, and in fact, in the period between 2004 and 2010, doubled actually in absolute numbers. The problem of poverty and the attendant deficits in human development indices becomes more significant because our population continues to grow at about 3% annually, and we are to become the world's most populous nation by 2050. The world's third most populous nation by 2050. Of this population, over 60% will be young people, and about 1.4 million entering the job market every year. But how do we explain the paradox of high growth figures and rising poverty and unemployment figures? The first explanation is that high oil revenues do not necessarily translate to jobs. The oil industry by itself produces very few jobs. The high revenues can only translate to jobs and better living standards if the revenues are invested in diversification of the economy, infrastructure, education and healthcare, and social protection for those who cannot work. The question, of course, is what happens to these revenues? How come we're unable to use the revenues in the way that they ought to be used? The most important drain on our resources is grand corruption, the stealing of large sums of public resource by public officials in collaboration with private individuals. I use the expression grand corruption to describe the direct looting of the treasury, not necessarily tied to any government contracts. This is in essence state capture. It is this heinous phenomenon that the Buhari administration has worked on to stop. What happens with grand corruption is that by diverting government revenues to private use, resources are not available to be invested in the manner that they are planned to benefit everyone, to benefit the majority of people. No economy can survive on the theft of the Commonwealth by its custodians. Impossible. And we must address the questions, especially of grand corruption, squarely. It's a different thing. And I distinguish between grand corruption and any other kind of corruption, and we'll probably get a chance to talk about that in the plenary session on corruption. That's a different thing where government contracts are given out, and there's corruption in the course of execution of government contracts. That is different from looting. That is different from what we see. It is different from taking the resources where it really is and simply diverting it. It is that type of corruption, that grand corruption, that has bedeviled this country and has led to the kinds of resource drains that have refused us the kind of momentum that we ought to have in our economy. The second reason that explains the paradox of high growth figures and rising poverty and unemployment flows from the first, namely the poor investment in infrastructure and the creation of an enabling environment for business. The third is the lack of commitment to diversification of the economy, which would, of course, in turn provide multiple streams of revenue. This is both a problem at the national and at the subnational level. We have seen how the state's total dependence on monthly FAC allocations has led to a situation where few states can pay salaries without federal government, without the FAC. Yearly IGR in most states cannot pay their wage bills in 1 month. Nigeria's productive economy is the sum total of 36 states and the FCT. Where the states do not have enough private commercial activity, even agriculture, to generate sufficient IGR, job creation is stifled and poverty deepens. The fourth reason that explains the paradox of high growth figures and rising poverty and unemployment figures is the low investment over the years in the businesses at the bottom of the pyramid, the so-called informal sector. And we heard the last speaker speak about this so-called informal sector and why we need to recognize it and invest in it. The approach of the current government to reversing poverty and its consequences originated from the debates at the manifesto drafting stage, in which I had the privilege of participating. The two classic sides at play were those who felt that so long as we created a sufficiently enabling environment for businesses, for the formal sector to thrive, we would create enough jobs and opportunities for all. There was no need for a massive welfare scheme and no need for direct government creation of jobs. It always, according to the argument, leads to dependency, and it is unsustainable. The other argument, and the one that prevailed, was that while we supported a private sector-led economy, we had to intentionally address the creation of economic opportunities for the bottom of the pyramid, for the poorest. We were also convinced that government still had to create some jobs directly, especially for the large number of people coming out of tertiary institutions and who, of course, have no immediate opportunities. So a major premise of our economic model was a focus on empowering the jobless youth and millions in extreme poverty by a mix of microcredit schemes, infrastructure support for markets and small business clusters, and welfare for the most vulnerable, and the direct creation of jobs on a consistent basis. In sum, our focus has and will continue to be job creation. We've also decided that our focus will be on the following. One, ensuring that at least 30% of budget is spent on capital, especially infrastructure. To quote two leading Nigerian economists, as growth in public capital expenditure rises, unemployment falls, and the Human Development Index improves. Therefore, infrastructure-based policies, which initially reduce unemployment, will also improve the living conditions. Two, diversifying the economy, especially agriculture, mining, and the promotion of MSMEs. Three, strong fiscal discipline, especially zero tolerance for grand corruption. Four, support to states for payments of salaries and emoluments. And five, a social protection program covering at least 5 million of the poorest in its first phase. Most of these points were captured in detail in our Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. Generally speaking, we have tried to keep faith with these objectives. By putting in place a stricter regime of fiscal discipline, we provided for 30% capital expenditure from 2016, despite earning over 60% less than in the previous 4 years. We invested so far a total of 2.7 trillion in capital spent, the highest ever in the history of the country. This covers investments in rail, in roads, in power, and in dams. In diversifying the economy, agriculture has been a major success story, with increasing budgetary allocation to agriculture from 8.8 billion in 2015 to 46.2 billion in 2016 and 1.03 billion in this particular cycle. Through the Anchor Borrowers program, credit is given directly to smallholder farmers, and the Anchor Borrowers program is an agricultural program for financing smallholder farms. And the CBN and 13 other participating banks have so far given credit totaling 120.6 billion naira. And this has been given to 720,000 smallholder farms who cultivate 12 commodities so far, including rice, wheat, cotton, soya, cassava, poultry, and groundnuts across the 36 states and the FCT. In addition, we launched a fertilizer program to improve local blending capacity in collaboration with the Kingdom of Morocco. Today, we have 11 fertilizer blending plants with a capacity for 2.1 million metric tons. Price has dropped to fertilizer per bag from about 13,000 and hovers anywhere between 5,000 and 7,000 naira per bag. The Anchor Borrowers program is now digitized. We have all farmlands GPRS marked, biometric data of farmers is captured, electronic cards are issued, and specific inputs are required. This has enhanced traceability and enhanced productivity and yield also. Today, but for a few drawbacks, we are confidently approaching self-sufficiently in rice production. From importing $5 million of rice every single day, official imports are now down to 2%. And if you note, I said official imports are down to 2%. We have paid attention to supporting the states through loans. Paris Club refunds owed since 2005 and budget support facilities totaling 1.9 trillion naira so far have been given to the states in one form of support or the other. The simple reason being to ensure that consumer spending in the states does not suffer even more. On assumption of office in 2015, over 20 states were owing salaries for periods ranging from 3 to 12 months. For most states, the regular income of civil servants is a critical part of the economy of those states. A major plank of our administration's plan to move the needle positively on the poverty numbers is the Social Investment Program. Our social investment program is the largest and most ambitious social investment program in the history of our country. We provided 500 billion for it in both the 2016 and 2017 budgets. But the total spend on the program so far in both cycles is closer to 250 billion, and that's from both budgets. The program has 6 components. The Empower program, which is our graduate employment scheme, and this is the largest post-tertiary jobs project in Africa. 500,000 graduates have been recruited as teachers, agricultural extension workers, and as public health officials. The last batch of 300,000 were recruited at the end of August. Each of these volunteers is provided with an electronic tablet. The first 200,000 have been provided. We're yet to provide the remaining 300,000.